All right, I'm going to make a, this is probably going to be a fairly long one. I tried to keep them around 5 minutes or so, but this is probably going to be 10, maybe longer, I don't know. But I've been thinking about this stuff, and I wanted to kind of put in one space all the stuff I've learned. I've been messing around. I'm not saying I'm any kind of commercial head porter or professional head porter or anything like that, but I've been messing with it for a little over 20 years now. And for probably the first 18 of them, I really didn't know what I was doing, and still had that mentality of just taking metal out is what the objective is, and as long as you're taking metal out, you're really not hurting the head. And to some extent that's true, but to another extent you're wasting an exorbitant amount of time and accomplishing nothing. I've learned since I finally I kind of stopped and backed up and tried to learn the science behind all this stuff. And I've read books, and I don't know if it just doesn't sink in or what, but stuff finally started clicking for me, and I wanted to try to kind of sum this all up into one video and kind of give you the anatomy of a port and what your objective is in the port. And honestly, I think with what I'm going to tell you, you can not even have a flow bench and get the majority of your potential gain that you're going to get, even if you had a bench. You know, it takes extensive on and off the bench, and on and off the bench, and you end up realizing how much of it's a waste of time before you finally hit the hot spot, and then you gain on it, and then once you get the first one figured out, well, then the rest of them are easy. But anyways, I'm going to try to dive into it. So, all right. I guess I'll start with, a breakdown of the port. This is pretty basic stuff. You got your port entry, and then usually you're going to have your push rod pinch, right about here, and that's usually going to be your first restriction, but not always. Like I said, that's something that kind of comes with, you kind of do have to have a bench in a sense, or do a port mold, and it all kind of goes together here, so I'll try not to get ahead of myself. But anyways, you got push rod pinch, and then you got your actual port, and then you go into your short turn in your bowl area, and then you've got what needs to be your throat, which is directly underneath the seat. All right, so that's the basics of it. For me, from now on going forward, a port mold is going to be the first thing I do, because that lets me go in and take a pair of calipers and measure this port incrementally and get accurate area measurements on it and figure out where the smallest area of it is. And it also lets you get a profile of the port, which is incredibly helpful. Like, this is the actual ported, whenever I was done, and it was pretty decent, but really shows you what you can't see without it. A flow bench will kind of show it to you in a way, but man, this, for me, because I'm a visual person, this was just really a step forward. But like I said, the first step is basically mapping the port as far as the size and trying to figure out where your restrictions are. And ultimately, your ultimate goal is for the restriction to be the throat, right here. You want that to be between 88 and 92, usually 87 to 91, 87, 92, somewhere in there, of the actual valve diameter area. So the first you figure your valve area, take that times roughly 88 to 90, and then that's the area you're going to want this to be, at your throat, which is the smallest point, which is basically going to be below your last seat angle, valve angle, I should say, not seat angle. You got one seat angle. But you got your 30, then you got your 45, and then you got your 60, and then your 75. And what you're going to do is your throat is usually going to end up somewhere in here. One of the biggest things is don't take your throat out to your seat, because that you've just wrecked your throat, and that is a lot of what's creates the velocity and gets the air going into the port, because that is a venturi just like a carburetor, and the air is accelerating as it comes through it. You got to slow it down around the bowl in the short turn so it can make that curve, and then you got to speed it back up going into the port so that it induces swirl and mixture motion. So from above, what that's going to look like is you want a big bowl. You're gonna spread this out wide, and you're gonna spread it out up. To some extent, what you're looking at is this area right here, and kind of trying to control that as it makes its way around the port, because there's not a tremendous amount of airflow back here on this side. So taking a lot of metal out back there probably isn't going to help. But widening it at the short turn, which I don't have a decent diagram of the short turn, but widening it at the floor of the port around the short turn is a way to slow the air down and get it around the corner too. Okay, so going around that corner at lower lifts, what you've got is the air. It makes the short turn, and then some goes on and carries past, and it basically comes out around the valve, you know, in every direction. To some extent, you're going to have cylinder wall on this side, so you're going to have some shrouding, and it's going to favor, you know, if the port's coming in this way, it's going to favor this side more, because this is essentially having to make a 180-degree turn, but more of it's getting in on this side and this side. Once you hit, what my understanding is, once you hit a quarter of the valve diameter, which is 0.25 times the diameter, you hit your convergence point, and that is when the air is going to basically skip off the short side, skip off the back side of the valve, and basically all the air is going to start coming out over here. So that's something just to kind of help you grasp what's going on in the port, and that's why I didn't know at the time, but that's why that 0.25 is usually around 450. It depends on the valve diameter, but like 450, 400, 500, somewhere in there. And if you got a bad short turn or too much airspeed around the short turn, that's when a lot of times it'll go turbulent on you and you'll start going backwards. And I never understood that. And also if you've got if you have no throat, because what you've done is you've just taken that and just dumped it in there, and a lot of time you're going to create like an eddy current. You know, as the air is going past, it's going to start back swirling on itself and start, as Darren Morgan said, backing up the port. So if you do have a flow bench and you start seeing it backing up, then you know that that's probably a short side issue. And usually what cures that is lowering the short side. But lowering the short side is a trade-off, like everything is in this stuff. It fixes your high lift, it helps your high lift, but it hurts your low lift, because now the air has a harder time making that turn at the slower air speeds. So like I say, you got to find a mix on this stuff. While I'm kind of on the throat area and the valve angles, they also say that your valve angles need to be 15 degrees, no more than 15 degree changes, because it's not that the air can't make the curve, it's that the fuel can't make the curve. And kind of like the eddy currents, what that does is it creates a shear point and helps to reintroduce liquid fuel that's running down the port floor back into the airstream. And also, like if you see well, I mean, I don't know whether to get into that or not. Some people, they put a fin in the floor, like if this is a port and you look down it, they'll put a fin right before it drops off the short side. And what that's to do is to force that fuel back over here into the higher speed area of the port, which is the air is hauling ass around the short turn. So it's supposed to pick that back up and get it back in the airstream, because the last thing you want is liquid fuel going in the chamber. But I think that's the gist of what I wanted to say there. So like I say, you just need to understand the bowl, the throat, and that your main objective is to make the smallest point in the port the throat. And on junk stock heads, a lot of times that's not going to happen. Which brings me to another thing, is getting carried away with valve size when you got some tiny little junk port and putting a 202 valve in it. And then if you go ahead and correct your throat up to, you know, 88% of this 202 valve, and you had a port that was too small for the 175 or 178 to begin with, what's usually going to happen is you'll pick up some mid lift and low lift a little bit earlier, because the valve is seeing more area sooner as it's opening than with a smaller valve. It's kind of the same effect as de-shrouding a little bit. It's just seeing more area quicker. But you can also get into a situation where by the time you blend this in, you've wrecked your short side because you don't have enough material in here to correct it. And it just, to me, putting like a 202 in a stock valve, and then they go in there with a bull hog, and it's just complete junk after that. But everybody thinks they run because they put a big valve in them, and I don't know, I'm not seeing it, because this last head I did, I had a 175 in it and went 235, and I've seen 202s that don't go 235. So I'm not convinced. I didn't even get that poured up to where the throat was the smallest part of that, and that was with the 175 valve. So like I say, a 202, there may be something in that, but to me, and this goes with another thing I was going to mention, it comes down to, you know, spending the money versus what gain you're going to get. Because by the time you put a 202 in there, or as I was going to mention later on, that another place you can pick up a gain would be like on these Mopars. They got a big old valve, 3/8 valve, I think, and you could go in there and line the guides and put a 5/16 valve in there, 11/32, small block Chevy, and a neck down 11/32 at that, and it will pick up lift. But again, on these heads, you got to start weighing, is it worth, you know, putting guides in it, getting a new set of valves, doing all that stuff for, you know, if it's a street engine, and it's just not quite worth it. If you're in some max effort, you know, circle track deal where you're limited on the heads and you're looking for everything, then yeah, you start exploring those options. But to me, you can make the stock junk work pretty decent without a lot of money if you just know what your objective is, and that's a lot of it. But so I'm going to back up a little bit and break down the port. And one thing I wanted to say is gasket matching. That's the first thing everybody gets hung up on. And I made a little video, this probably wasn't scientific enough, but about how critical gasket matching is, and my little test didn't really show that it mattered that much. But one thing is, don't get hung up on the gasket match. It's not about matching the gasket. It's about the ports matching each other. And like, especially like on a Dodge head, they got a huge push rod bulge like this. And then like from the factory, okay, it's like this. And then you gasket match it, and you bring this out, and you bring this side out, and all of a sudden you've just made this funnel. This made this super high speed area. The air's slow, it just starts blasting, and then it slows down, and then it hits the short turn. And the main thing you want is consistent airspeed through the entire port. So don't get hung up on gasket matching so much as port matching. You don't want port misalignment if you can avoid it. But that doesn't necessarily mean making a bell out of the port entry trying to match a gasket that's too big for the port anyways. There's nothing, you're not going to get nothing there. And it don't show up on the flow bench either. Opening up the pinch, this does show up on the bench. Belling that, it ain't. But people get hung up on that, and they think, again, like I used to do, you're taking metal out, you think you're gaining, and that ain't necessarily always the case. But anyways, yeah. So, like I said, don't dwell on gasket matching so much as port matching. Your gasket does not have to be out, or your port entry does not have to match the gasket size. They just need to align with each other and be the same size as each other. And like I say, the next step back is going to be your push rod pinch. Obviously, you want to open that up as much as you can, and that's usually going to be your restriction on most ports. Not always, but most of the time. And it also creates a second high-speed area no matter what you do, but you want to minimize that as much as you can. So then you got your actual port runner. Not much to say there other than you want this is like your cylinder. You want your cylinder wall side straight as you can get it. Because the air is going to be coming out of the intake, and it's mostly going to be focused over here on this side. And then as it comes into the port, it's going to force itself off the cylinder wall side. But as a rule, you want this as straight as you can get it, you know, and then it's going to bill out down at the bowl area, which is as it goes around the corner. This is your bowl, basically from here to there. And like I said, that's where, honestly, you're going to pick up a lot. And on these Mopar heads, they got a nasty guide. And that guide is taking up area inside the port that's already too small. So the first thing to do is get that crap out of there. Open this up. Get some room in there to slow that air down. And that'll help it not go turbulent on you. And then obviously a nice blend into into the short side, blend the short side into your throat. And like I said, make sure you get that third angle on there. Don't take it all the way out to the 45. Make sure you at least get some of that 60 and hopefully a little bit of a 75. And then as you work yourself into the valve, the actual valve itself, then you need to start focus on shrouding. And the rules on shrouding here real quick, I mentioned in another video, but I'm trying to sum all this up into one. As Vizard said, I made a little flow ball. At a 1/4 inch lift, you want a 1/4 inch of clearance all the way around your valve. At 3/8 lift, you want 3/8 of an inch clearance. And you ain't gonna be able to get it all the time. But you do the best you can do with what you got, you know. And if I had a 4-inch bore, this is a 318, I could about get this out, and I probably could. But this one I'm not that worried about. But that's something to be cognizant of as you're working, and focus on that, because valve shrouding helps all the way up to that 400, 450, that convergence point. And that's where you're going to maximize your area under the curve. You know, it's probably going to help your peak numbers too a little bit, but it's more about area under the curve. Make it a nice, pretty arc than just straight up, you know, to your max flow number. The more meat you got underneath that graph, the more area that's going to get in any given time. So, like I said, that's your valve shrouding. And like I said, 0.25 the diameter of the valve is when the valve is considered unshrouded. That means it's got enough area around it that the shrouding is irrelevant. And then that's when the air goes from working itself all the way around the short side and back into the chamber this way to just skipping off the back side. That's when fuel starts slamming into this side, when stuff starts getting a little bit rowdy. But I was gonna say something else. Oh, I'll talk about cross-sectional area. There's a formula. This is your goal, and on these stock heads, you're not gonna be able to hit it all the time. It's just something you deal with, but it's something, again, to keep in your mind. If you know your cubic inches, you know your target RPM, this is a formula to figure out how much cross-section you need, which is obviously cross-section. That's, you know, width times height, and then you gotta remove or account for the radius in the corners to be accurate here. But you can do width times height just to get you in the ballpark, but you'd be surprised how much those corners eat up. But there's no point in squaring them out because the air ain't gonna be up there anyways, more than likely. You know, an oval port is pretty much ideal. You can square these out a little bit, but you go in there and make them a 90 and you're not gonna gain nothing, because the air's not gonna be up there. Air moves smoothly, you know. But anyways, cross-sectional area. Bore times stroke times RPM times 0.00353. Get that total, divide it by 613.8, and that's going to give you the minimal cross-sectional area, meaning probably your push-rod pinch. That doesn't count your throat, obviously, but that's your target on this port, and you're going to get as close as you can. Because like I said, the true restriction, ideally, is going to be your throat. But that's your objective. Get that. And I was going to also mention, like, I was figuring some stuff up on that 318. And whatever the area was that I figured up, I don't remember if it was what it was that was ideal or what I came up with. But at 6,000 RPM, a 318 uses the same amount of air as a 360 at 4,500 RPM. That doesn't mean the thing's just going to lay over and die, but it means it's not ideal. This is for ideal. You know, it's a target. Doesn't mean it's not going to work, but it just means it's something to strive for. You know, it's something to keep in the back of your mind. My cross-sectional areas, I don't remember. Yeah, my cross-sectional area was 62%. I think that was after it was ported, which is not good. Not good at all. Of the valve area. You know, the throat needs to be 88, and the throat's supposed to be the smallest part of the port. But bottom line is these heads work good because the airspeed's high because they got small runners. But I did a bunch of math crunching and stuff like that, and was trying to map the port, and it was interesting. It was mostly a learning experience, but I wanted to pass some of this stuff on. And I think I've got, on your last angle on your 30, the idea is to blend that on into the chamber. And what you don't want is your valve head sitting in a pocket, because a lot of times they'll go in there and cut that, and that stone, they'll sink the seat, and then you got this pocket, and then it comes on up into the chamber. So what you want to do is take that off and blend that out, and that way that air can immediately, as soon as the valve comes off the seat, the air's got somewhere to go. So you want to blend that 30 into the chamber, and that's done by, you about got to use an old valve and either grind the margin off or just use one that's a little bit too small, and be very patient and nice and use a small carbide burr. And you can start working that in. It takes some patience to do that, but it is doable. There's some airflow to be gained, absolutely, by undercut stems, undersized valve stems. Like I say, on these Mopars where they got this huge valve, you could bush the lift, or bush the valve guide and go to a smaller valve that's also neck down, and gaining honestly quite a bit right there. You'd be surprised how much I've, 10, 15 CFM everywhere on some of these. And let me look at my little list here. I'm gonna pause it for a second. All right, that's about all I got to say. I was gonna kind of explain Quench a little bit because I actually got a little bit of a grasp on it. What Quench is designed to do is, all right, your spark starts on this side. Ideally your spark plug would be right here so that the flame would just propagate everywhere equally. And again, you're controlling the speed of the flame across the chamber. But obviously the plug's on this side. So what's going on over here? Well, this propagates out, and the last thing that finally gets ignited is all the way over here, which can also lead itself to a hot spot over here that's got its own little spark going on, and that's coming back, and this is coming back, and they bang into each other. But the Quench is designed, as the piston comes up, to squish that air out and blow it back into the flame front so that it basically reduces the size of the flame front. And then on a turbo car, when they talk about softening the chambers, what they're going to do is cut this down some and then work it out to the edge, essentially to reduce quench area, to slow that down, because under boost and nitrous, the flame is faster because it's pressurized. Under boost and nitrous is essentially kind of like an accelerant, which also increases cylinder pressure, so they're trying to slow that down and control it. Whereas on a naturally aspirated engine, you're trying to speed it up. So that was kind of all I wanted to explain about on a Quench. But other than that, I don't get hung up with the polishing the chambers. The main thing is, like I said, valve shrouding is important. Blend these seats, like I don't know if you can see it here or not, but this is how I was talking about it, how it's sunk a little bit. And that screws up that first little bit of air, and that creates a turbulent spot all the way through. And anything that's turbulent is just taking up space. It's not letting stuff work like it should. So I think that's the majority of what I wanted to say. I'm sure as soon as I upload this, I'll remember some more stuff. I was going to say, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of this stuff, man, Darren Morgan had a couple interviews with Drag Boss, and they were absolutely fantastic. Darren Morgan is a genius at this stuff, man. Eats, sleeps, and breathes it. He's a super nice guy, and they were incredibly informative. But I've been reading this stuff for years and watching stuff, and I just never quite got it, and I just thought I'd put it all in one place, and maybe I can help somebody. There was also some videos I found of some wet flow. A guy had some videos of wet flow on there. Didn't have hardly any followers or anything like that, but it's the only videos of wet flow I've ever seen on YouTube, and I don't have his name on me, but if you look for it, you can probably find it, and it's kind of interesting. But yeah, that's the most of it. I just wanted to break down what you're trying to do when you do this stuff, and then after that, man, that's honestly, it's over my head. This gets me to where I don't feel like I'm screwing the head up. But if you do these basics, and even Darren Morgan said, he said, if you get your math right, do the basics, follow the numbers, you're going to be at 85 to 90% of what you're going to get out of that port. After that, that's whenever you have to have some intelligence. And I'm not saying I have intelligence, he does. But so anyways, like I say, credit to him and credit to Drag Boss, because those are a couple of amazing videos. But hopefully this helps somebody out. All right, I knew I was going to forget something, so I'm going to add it on here right at the end. A lot of people are probably never going to see this. But bowl diameter is something that I've never seen written on paper until I think it might have been Darren Morgan interview or whatever it was. But the objective is to get the bowl back up to about 100% of the valve diameter. So you got the valve, let's say, is 175. Your throat next down to I don't know what it is. I don't have it measured off the top of my head. Let's say it's 165. And then it opens right back up to valve diameter. And then you start to taper down to whatever your port entry is in a controlled manner. You know what I mean? But the idea of the bowl is to be roughly valve diameter. But that doesn't mean break through into water trying to get there. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. And also, like Eric Weingartner, he had some bigger valve stuff, and you can get into trouble breaking through your common wall here between your intake and exhaust valve. But on these, I was up, I don't know, well over 90%, probably 95%, something like that. But like I said, ideally, you're shooting for 100, just like you're shooting for your throat to be the smallest part of the port. It doesn't always happen, but I said, let's have an objective. Let's do the best we can. Let's try to get there. And I think you'll realize stuff will just fall into place on its own. But I wanted to add that. That was the one thing that I forgot to put in there. So